Hey, welcome to the Healthy Post Natal Body podcast with your postnatal expert Peter Lap. That, as always, will be me. This is the podcast for the 10th of April, 2022. And of course, date before music means I have a guest on and all that. And boy, you're in luck. I was talking to Dr. David Prologo the other day. He's basically spent more than 20 years specifically analyzing the phenomenon of diet attrition. You know, why diets always fail, why you can't stick to a diet. And he wrote a book called The Catching Point. And I think this clears a lot of stuff up for people. We had a wonderful conversation. He kindly gave up an hour of his time. We're talking about how you're probably how most people are getting weight loss wrong, and it's not your fault, and the industry is designed to kind of go against you. But you know, he has a solution, and it's one I wholeheartedly endorse and support. And I've been talking about this before, so I strongly recommend you listen to this if you're struggling with weight loss or just any getting into a new exercise routine or anything like that. If you want the real answer, not the sexy answer, not a secret answer, but the real answer, then without further ado, here's Dr. David Prologo. So let's start with the big question. You know, why does the health and fitness and even the diet industry keep getting weight loss advice so spectacularly wrong?
Oh, that is the big question, and so I'm glad that you would open with that. It's in the answer. I don't even think is that complicated. Excuse me. The answer really is that it's not necessarily that they're getting it wrong, and it's just that it's not doable, right? So the comparison I like to make: if you came to me with a disease such as cancer, for example, and I had a medicine that I knew killed cancer, and I gave it to you. I gave you a program to follow to get rid of your cancer, but you couldn't do it. You couldn't take the medicine or you couldn't follow the program. And you came back to me and you said, look, this is making me nauseated, or my muscles are sore. I just can't follow this program, right? Sir, I would never respond to you and say, well, geez, you just really must not want to be rid of your cancer. You're just a lazy, ASS. I would never say that, right? So, but that's what we do in this space. We create these programs that they're mathematically correct. If you could follow this calorie restriction, this upside down negative calorie balance for, say, a year, then you would end up losing weight.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that they have it wrong in that sense, but no one can do it. And what's important here, I think, is this isn't just me and my opinion, and I'm out here spouting this. The medical literature supports this, right?
Yeah.
We have diet after diet after diet that's created, and the only thing that correlates with success is what we call adherence, which is simply put, people who can stick to it, which no one can, because your body will rebel, and I won't go on too long about this, but if you went underwater, for example, and you stayed under there, after a while, your body's signals are going to make you burst to the surface, right? Because your body wants to survive, and if you start to decrease your oxygen or block your oxygen, eventually your body overcomes you and you come up to the surface, right? You just can't beat those signals. And it's the same thing with calorie restriction. No matter how you frame this calorie restriction, if you start exercising and restrict your calories immediately, your body rebels because it thinks you're starving, right? It sees this as a famine. And so it sends signals to your brain for you to go and seek food. It slows your metabolism and stores everything you eat so you don't starve, very much like the signals that it sends when you're underwater. So it's an undoable thing. So the answer to your question is this: we've gotten it wrong for so long because we're sending people off with these undoable programs. And to add insult to injury, when they come back to us and report that they're undoable, we then shamed them. we then, and again, it's no different than if you burst to the surface after, say, 30 seconds of being underwater, it would be no different than me looking at you and saying, "Phew, geez, oh man, I don't know what to tell you. I told you to stay underwater for 90 days. You don't do it." And it's just like that, right? So you would even ask yourself, if it's that simple, Dave, how does it sustain itself? It sustains itself because people are making money. People
Oh,
are
absolutely.
recreating these diets and selling them and making money. So what's the impetus for change?
Oh, no, absolutely. This is what I always used to say. Groups like Weight Watchers and their variations, their whole premise is that you fail, right? And
Right.
and the nice thing is you fail, but blame yourself. And that's why you don't cancel your membership, and that's why you keep coming back.
You're
Um,
so right. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. So in this book, I don't want to like open, try
yeah,
to
go
sneak the
for it.
book in
Yeah.
here. But that's not really why I brought it up. But there really is a section in the book where I say that I use the analogy, if I sold you a car, right? And then I gave you a key that didn't work. And so you bought the car and the key doesn't work. So the car doesn't work. But I convinced you that it's your fault the key doesn't work,
Mhm.
right? So then you kind of just sit in your apartment. Well, I guess it is my fault. I mean, I should be able to turn the key, right? And you paid me for the car. The car doesn't work, and I've convinced you that it's your fault, right? So after a month or 2 months or 3 months of not being able to start your car because it doesn't work, believing that it's your fault.
Mhm.
So then what do? You say, well, you don't want to go back and embarrass yourself with me. I'll just go over here and buy a different
Different
car,
car. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then the
yeah.
same thing happens to you again. And as this keeps happening, you spiral downward and say to yourself, I must be the dumbest, most worthless person who everybody seems to be able to start these cars except for me. You're right. It's the greatest arrangement in the world from a financial incentive standpoint of the car seller or the diet / weight loss plan seller. So you
Mhm.
got it. I agree with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that it's very interesting. Now, we've made weight loss adherence because that's essentially what we're talking about. Like you said, the fundamentals are straightforward enough. You're in a calorie deficit, therefore you'll likely lose weight. But we've made weight loss adherence this big trick, right? It has to
Right.
be keto, it has to be Atkins, it has to be a 1,200 calorie a day diet. It
Mm-hmm.
has to be, you have to drink shakes instead of eating solids, just whatever. There's a magic secret that I think everybody who is who genuinely has some qualifications behind them, such as yourself, will go, actually, guys, come on, this is not what we need to do. It sells more books. I'll grant you that. I mean, we have a guy in the UK who keeps churning out a new diet book pretty much every year based around the 800 calories a day sort of thing.
Right.
Um, and his books are very successful because they promise fast weight loss, right?
Right.
But
Right.
adherence is, of course, very low. So the following year, you just buy the new one because he tells you that that new book is going to be better than the old one was.
Indeed.
But
Indeed.
someone
But
like yourself,
adherence is a mystery. I'm so sorry to
yeah,
interrupt you,
no,
but
go for it, yeah.
but honestly, without exaggeration, this is the best discussion I've had about this because you've dialed right in on it. Adherence is, and so that's what I wrote about. That's exactly what my book is about, is adherence, and my practice is about that too.
Mhm.
Instead of trying to figure out all these different ways to package the same calorie restriction, I wanted to focus on exactly that, adherence,
Mhm.
because it's clear that there are reasons that we cannot adhere, and they're not mental, they're not psychological, it's not a mind over matter issue.
Mhm.
There are biological reasons why we cannot adhere. So I did this study with the hunger nerve freezing that was very famous and got all this press a couple of years ago. And what we did there was we blocked the nerve that carries the hunger signal from an empty stomach, right?
Mhm.
And the purpose of that was to prove that if we blocked that hunger signal and people felt less hungry and they felt it's not just hunger, but those signals also send you on survival based food seeking missions.
Right.
If you can imagine, the longer you go without food, how everything else will fall away until eventually that's all you're thinking about, right? So
Mhm.
it's not just simply hunger, but we wanted to show that if we block that signal, people would have better adherence. People would have an easier time sticking to the diet regardless of what the diet was.
Mhm.
And so the purpose there was twofold. Number one, what you're saying, which is so great to hear, it's adherence that we need to be focusing on, not the package of the negative calorie restriction. And number two, it's a body thing. It's not mind over matter. We didn't implant willpower and then people had success. We blocked the body's signals that otherwise would stop people. So it really is a body issue. It's a biological issue. It's no different than heart disease or diabetes or any other condition in which we treat the body. So we need to address adherence, to your point. And the things that are blocking adherence, we need to stop saying that they originate in the mind, because they don't. They originate in the body.
So that's a really interesting point that you raised there, because I remember I went to school a long, long time ago, quite a lot of hair ago, and we were told that the human needs pyramid is food, shelter, and heat. Right? Those are the foundations. Everything is built on that, so to speak. And I've never considered this before, so pardon me if I'm massively mistaken. But I suppose they are essentially primal drivers, so to speak, as in from our deepest monkey-like behavior. I need food, I need heat, and I need shelter.
Correct.
If we then start to restrict food to a large extent, I suppose what you're saying is then it's impossible to control the monkey even if we call it a monkey.
It's impossible. You're right. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the topic of the book. And this is the best podcast I've ever been on, because you got right to it. Because for some reason, it's a hard thing for people to comprehend or process this topic. And whenever I try to drill down on it, they kind of like, it's like Jello, like to get over here and get over there. And they don't necessarily have an easy time drilling down and comprehending exactly what you just said. You just said it perfectly. I should have written it that way. You're exactly right. It is indeed impossible to resist. Now, every time I say that, I realize that there's some person out there who did it, right? They white knuckled their way through it, but that's one person out of 100 million, right? Or one person out of 1,000. Well, I'm not talking about that one person. I'm talking about the other 99%, right? The CDC has shown us that 50% of people in the United States alone failed a diet last year. That's 150 million people, right? Who aren't able to do it. If that's not evidence that it's impossible, I don't know what is. And like I said, somebody who hears this will then surface and say, it's not impossible, I did it. But I'm not talking about that one single outlier. And even the people who are successful, we know that most of them gain it back in the long run. And even the 1% of the 1% who keep it off, they're always fighting the same thing. I'll give you another example. I'll give you the hunger signal example, right? But there's another one. If I restrict your calories, especially if I make you exercise, by the way, it's definitely the body will perceive this as a big problem. Our food is gone and now we're on the move, right? So now we've lost our shelter too. So if you try both of those things at once, you for sure sending the famine signal to your primitive self. So in addition to the hunger signal, there's your basal metabolic rate. Your body burns X number of calories each and every day just to stay alive, right? When you restrict your calorie and start exercising, the body says, we're in a famine now. What does it do? It slows down that basal. It has a way to conserve calories, to conserve energy so that you don't die. So you cut your calories by 500, say, just as an example. The body then perceives this as a starvation event and slows down its own calorie burning in order to survive, and then stores everything that you do eat in order to survive, offsetting everything that you did, right? So then how does that translate clinically? Clinically, patients come to you and say, Doc, I did it. I cut my calories by 500. I kept track and I didn't lose a pound. Well, guess why? Because your body just offset everything that you tried to do in the name of survival. But instead of saying, that's why, instead we'll say, oh, did you really cut your calories, or were you eating Doritos in the closet and you don't want to tell me, right? And so then there's all this sort of nuanced mind over matter nonsense. But the way you put it is exactly what the book is about, exactly what we need to focus on and change if we want to change outcomes as it pertains to weight loss. And by the way, it's not just weight loss, but go on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because that's fascinating. Because of course, I come from a personal training background. I still kind of do. The first thing we were told is always that if your client is not losing weight, it means they're not counting calories accurately. And we were told the classic weight loss is 70% diet, 30% exercise or something. And now we realize, and by saying now we realize, I mean, let's say people who went past their personal training qualifications have realized that stress impacts weight loss, sleep impacts weight loss,
Right.
environment impacts weight loss. So all of a sudden, we're not talking 70-30 anymore. It becomes a very complicated mix. Hyperpalatable foods, the kind of food you consume.
The number of calories it takes to digest a gram of this type of food.
Yes. All that sort of stuff impacts weight loss. So it is not as straightforward as we were always led to believe, that if the client can't lose weight, the client is bullshitting you. That's kind of always that's what we're always told, or is miscalculating their calorie intake or whatever it is. So when you're talking about from a biological perspective, when you're talking about freezing that hunger nerve and all that sort of thing, what are the biological issues that prevent people losing weight? If it's not calorie restriction.
So so we've named two already. So I think what you're asking is what are we doing that is inducing these responses, right? Okay, that's such a great question. And the first and most obvious we've already mentioned, and that is that it's always a Monday, right? On Monday, I'm going to start my diet, right? And what does that mean? It means that you've picked some calorie restriction plan. Call it keto or very low calorie diet, whatever it may be. And you're going to start to exercise on that day, right? And so your diet and exercise plan is going to start. And so you couldn't combine two things that flare up those survival-based responses more than calorie restriction and exercise on day one, which is the typical routine. So in addition to not providing the fuel that your body thinks it needs to live, now you've put an extraneous stress on your body in the name of exercise, which the body also perceives as a threat and just lights this entire thing on fire. You need to eat so that we can repair and recover from this exercise bout. And by the way, if the body doesn't realize that you're just trying to look pretty, right, or be healthy, it thinks that you're on the move, or you have to find a new place to live, and so you're going to need energy for that, and so you're going to have to eat. So those two things combined are what I call the duo of doom, right? It's the most obvious mistake that most people make. And so kind of divide if we say, how are we going to improve adherence? How are we going to battle the body's response or block the body's response so we can be successful? You can divide that answer into two big buckets. One is medical interventions, like the one that we talked about, blocking the hunger. The other one is things that you can do on your own to soften the response or to condition your body to this new way of living. And the very first thing you can do is separate out diet and exercise. And so what we talk about in the book is the title of the book, The Catching Point, is an actual mathematically quantified ability to do amount of exercise. I know you understand this, but for your listeners,
of course,
it's quantified into minutes. It's an exercise capacity, right? And so we start with exercise because first and foremost, if you start with both, we just talked about that, right? So you have to pick one. Now you can pick either, but for the purposes of explaining my book and giving one example, let's pick exercise. If you decide you're going to start and you're going to lose weight, let's say you want to empty a pool and I gave you a Dixie cup, right? That's pretty much the exercise capacity of most people who are 250, 260 pounds, 5'5", 5'6", and they're going to start this thing on Monday. They really have the exercise capacity of a Dixie cup trying to enter a pool. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to pick exercise only so that your body doesn't respond and shut you down, so you can stay on. But the second reason, in addition to shutting down the body's signals or sort of tricking the body, is you've got to get yourself a bigger tool, like a bucket, if you're going to enter that pool, or a reversed hose or something, because the amount of exercise that most people can do on that day one is not significant, right? It's not going to impact weight loss. And so we pick that exercise and we progress until we have that 220 minutes, which is, again, I know you know this, but for your listeners, it's about the ability to jog 30 minutes without stopping. Once you've changed your exercise capacity to that amount, two magical things happen. Thing one, and this is what I think is the most important thing. Thing one is it becomes less unpleasant, right? Going back to the 250, 270, 556, person who's starting, it's miserable. I put you out there and say, go run around the block. It's a miserable experience. But for a lean person, which, by the way, most physical trainers are lean, right? Yeah. They love it. They would get up, go run around the block. They're smiling and drinking their water. They love it, right? Yeah. But the new dieter hates it. It's a horrible, miserable, terrible experience. And so the first magical thing that happens at that catching point is that experience of it being terrible goes away. And you start to switch sides, and all of a sudden you're smiling also, and all of a sudden you're enjoying these endorphins, and you're enjoying the positive feelings that go along with exercise that most of the lean people understand. That's the very first magical thing that happens at that catching point. The second magical thing that happens at that catching point is now you've increased your ability to impact your weight loss. You really can't impact your weight loss with exercise on day one because it's too small. But if you've got this 220 minutes capacity now you've got the ability to burn enough calories to actually make a difference, right? Now that takes a while to get there, so it's not popular. People don't want to hear this. They want a diet and exercise program that's going to get me there in 90 days. They don't want to hear this layered approach where I need you to spend the first 6 to 8 months changing your exercise capacity and then slowly bringing in your dietary changes so that you can change your life in the long run. You're not going to sell a lot of books with that approach, but I wrote it because it's the truth. I wanted to see how the truth might sell. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. It is the most difficult. That is what I always tell people is the most difficult sale in the world is the truth, because you can't put it in one page. It's not one Instagram post that just goes, actually, guys, it's a bit more complicated than this.
It is. And I got beat to death trying to get a book deal with this.
I'm sure.
I would go to the publishing houses, not Postal Press, who ultimately did publish my book, but I would go to the publishing house and I would say, look, what you've published here, what you see here, people can't do this, right? I mean, look at the CDC data. But they look at me like, what do you mean people can't do it? What difference does that make? This sells. That's what they said. And I said, well, let me tell you from my obesity medicine training, my clinical experience, let me tell you how you can get this done by quieting the body's signals, how you can get people to actually switch sides and enjoy this new lifestyle and succeed. And I think they would hang up by that time because they didn't want to hear all that. What they really wanted was, do you have a program for me that says 90 pounds in 90 days? Because that's what sells. But what's in this book is what is real.
Yeah, because it's not a fancy headline, is it? As in, take it easy, guys, you'll get there. Or even saying things along the lines of, this will suck in the beginning, but don't worry, it'll be okay.
Right.
Because
but isn't everything like that, right?
Oh,
if we think about it, there's no other thing that we would believe this, right? If we gave a book and said, here's a way to become a millionaire in 90 days.
Yeah.
We'd be like, that's not real, right? But if we say, get the body you want in 90 days, like, oh, that's probably true. Yeah. I don't know why we believe the second one, but not the first, right? Or any other big project that we might undertake, say becoming a doctor, for example. If I published a book and said, you do cardiac surgery in in 90 days. You know, nobody would believe that. They would say, I've got to do some prep work first, get to a critical point, maybe my medical degree, after which it might be a little bit easier for me to learn the steps of cardiac surgery. And so this project that we're proposing here, getting to the catching point first and having an easier time afterwards, this is how everything really is in life. And I just would like people to give that a try. You know, I had a mentor of mine when I was learning my specialty, my interventional radiology specialty. It's a procedure-based specialty, right? And he said to me one day, and it just stayed with me forever. He said, Dave, if what you're doing is not working, he was talking about the procedures, try something else. Man, how simple, but how true, right? So let's try something else here.
The problem is, of course, now try something else within the health and fitness and diet industry means try another crash diet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Keto doesn't work for me because I don't like to eat too much meat. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go on the raw food diet. Or I'll buy the medical mediums book and do a liver cleanse, or God knows, all that sort of stuff.
And each time you do that, it's like pulling back a rubber band. You're against the resistance. You can only hold it there for so long, but your body bounces back. And again, this isn't my personal opinion. This is what the medical literature supports happens in the long run when you try to just you try to just go against the grain. Think about metabolic surgery. That's or classically called bariatric surgery, or people still call it gastric bypass. Even you know, there are a lot of surgeries, and these surgeries are just changes in the metabolic profile. They just change the hormone profile of the body. People used to think that the stomachs got smaller, and that's
exactly what we were told. Yeah,
But that is not at all how it works, right? So in the last 10 or 15 years, it's become crystal clear that what happened was there's a segment of the stomach that produces the hunger hormone ghrelin, right? And what the surgeons were doing was cutting out that portion of the stomach. Even though their idea was to make it smaller, it worked because the hunger hormones all dropped because they took out the hunger hormone producing cells and they changed the hormones in the patients. And that's why these weight loss surgeries worked, not because of this old-fashioned idea that there's less room in the stomach or something like that. And that's really what uncovered all the complexity of weight loss with this hormones of ghrelin and leptin and all these things. So it's a body process. It's a body process, not mind over matter.
Well, so how does quality of nutrition play into this? I'm personally very big on one of the big issues, I think, especially in the West, is hyperpalatable foods. As in, I can consume 1,000 calories in one sitting of Doritos or Pringles or whatever, right? That's right. I'm not full afterwards. I'm not content afterwards either, and I feel like shit, admittedly. But it's not a challenge. I can eat a Subway meatball marinara a foot long. That's about 5 minutes, and I can have a packet of crisps afterwards. It's not, and that's not because I can eat so much. It's not a challenge. A large Domino's isn't a challenge for anyone I know.
There are biological explanations for exactly what you're saying. This is no accident that these McDonald's burgers and these Subway sandwiches are this way, because, and I know you know this, but for you know, what it does is it spikes your glucose, right? And then your insulin spikes. And then all of that glucose is drawn out of your bloodstream in a rapid fashion, right? Not in it's a very high spike and then a clearance in a rapid fashion, not the way we were built to survive with levels that are more constant. And so what happens when your glucose is dropped like that and taken into the cells so rapidly, you feel hungry. And that's how you think to yourself, how did I just eat a meatball sub and I'm still hungry? And how does that happen? And then, so the flip side of that is, how can we use the macronutrients to again, not to always go back to the same well, but to quiet the body's response, to quiet the body's hunger response? How do we get the opposite effect of what you're talking about? And that's where these high protein diets come in. Because we know that disproportionate protein in your meal affects your hunger. It makes you less hungry. And the added bonus, of course, is that it takes more calories to burn a gram of protein than it does to burn a carbohydrate or a fat.
Mhm.
So if you can eat a disproportionately high protein diet, you will feel fuller and you will burn more calories as part of your digestion. So on the one end of the spectrum, as you described, the hyperpalatable foods are created in such a way to make you feel hungry still, even after you eat 1,000 calories. Then the complete other side of that coin is how can we exploit the different macronutrients and the percentages that we have in our diet to make ourselves feel fuller and be slimmer.
Cool. So before everybody runs off and goes full keto here,
Yeah, yeah. Which,
because
by the way, keto is another good example of how to start with one. I think
Mhm.
most of the keto, it's the flip side of the catching point transformation, which starts with your exercise capacity. But still, the principle is the same. They start with diet first, right?
Yeah.
Most of the keto diets will tell you to stay off exercise early on,
Mhm.
in this for the same reason. But sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So before everybody runs off and goes full keto and runs to Five Guys or whatever burger joint it is and says, leave the buns and just give me just give me some
Yeah,
lettuce to wrap my
yeah.
burger in. Do the food nutrients, as in does quality of food, does quality of food have a significant impact on this weight loss thing? Are we, because of, especially with regards to adherence?
Right. So it absolutely does. And it all goes together. So the quality of food does indeed impact your success with weight loss, which essentially is adherence. Those
Yeah.
two things are interchangeable. But it's not only that, right? It also decreases the quality of the food, that is, decreases your risk of disease that goes along with processed foods, which we will
Mhm.
say are on the low end of quality of food.
Yeah.
And it also prolongs your lifespan.
Mhm. Of
So
course.
David Sinclair, who's a popular Harvard professor talking about prolonging your life, talks a lot about this and the quality of food.
Mhm.
And so, what people on the street or on the other end of this podcast can translate this message as is the less processed your food, the more likely you are to succeed with your weight loss efforts, the less likely you are to develop disease, and the more likely you are to live longer.
Mhm. Yeah, because that is a point I always try to hammer home, especially kind of with regards to everything. But I think from my perspective, I've spoken to a lot of dietitians on this podcast, um, that will all say that, listen, you need to make sure that the quality of your food is, for health reasons, is the best you can afford, right? And we know everybody has a different price point and all that sort of stuff. Just do the
Mhm.
best you can. That's all we can all do. We can't all buy organic chicken at $20 a chicken, but you buy the middle of the range one, or you eat a bit less, or whatever you can do.
Right.
So
No doubt about it. And you mentioned that you have a lot of dietitians on this podcast and a lot of smart people who give that advice, which
mhm,
I totally agree with. But we did say as one of those three things, living longer, decreased disease, and then weight loss as far as quality of food. I just want to make sure that I make the point that when we're talking about weight loss, right, and whatever in the context of
yeah.
quality of food right now, that is a different thing than maintenance, right?
Oh,
So
sure.
so it's important to I think for everyone to realize that it's a much bigger challenge for us to change our weight, to change our body habits, to change our life than it is to maintain an already lean physique.
Mhm.
Both will indeed have to consider the high quality of food, but it's not the same project.
Oh, no, no, absolutely. I mean, let's be honest. I always say to people, weight loss isn't remarkably difficult. It's not remarkably sexy, like what you said. It takes a long time.
Mhm.
Um, it's not a difficult thing to wrap your head around, but it's a difficult thing to stick to, and it's a difficult thing to get done. Right? Let's be
Right,
honest.
right.
I think most people who are overweight or obese or morbidly obese, it's a any sort of lifestyle change is a difficult thing, right? We all
Right,
have to,
right.
I think, admit that. I mean, one of my friends is a change manager at a bank, and his entire job is to convince people in a team that change in the company is a good thing. Right? Changing processes is a good thing. And he
Right,
absolutely
right,
hates his job because he said it's the most difficult thing in the world to
right.
convince people to do their job differently.
Right, right. And even worse, if the person, and I'm not sure if your friend has been through it or not in that setting, but many times we as advisors or physical trainers or dietitians haven't been through the change ourselves,
Sure.
right? So it doesn't make what you're saying untrue about the quality of food, but it does create a disconnect if you don't understand the experience. And earlier on, I said, I made the comment that it's not just weight loss. I treat a lot of patients with pain, and the same sort of thing comes up, right? If you're treating a patient with pain, you'll notice that they act a certain way and so on. And if you haven't been through that experience, then there's this disconnect, right? And so it is really important, not to be too philosophical on your podcast there, but
Sure.
it is really important for us to try and understand the other person's point of view, and to realize that just listing a bunch of things that are kind of true in the universe, like negative calorie balance would equal weight loss, or you can't take opioids or you're going to get addicted. Just making a list of things that are true in the universe doesn't make the change easy or even possible, right? So we've got to focus on the things that grease the wheels for change, which when it comes to weight loss is adherence, and for pain management it's empathy, and we could go on, mental illness and so on. So
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously, this is a Healthy Post Natal Body podcast, and everybody who's listened to this and who listens to this and who's done my programs, all that sort of stuff, will know that I'm a guy. I'm a middle-aged white guy. I've never given birth.
right,
I can tell you how the body responds to this sort of stuff, but I can only empathize in a way that I have listened to many of my clients, many of my members' experience. And it's exactly like what you said. I listened to their experience and I've changed and modified my behavior accordingly to be now in the position that I'm at, that I'm relatively successful at what I do and all that sort of stuff. And that people like to listen to me because I'm not just a middle-aged white guy telling women that's just what you should be doing. I think we've all learned
you
a
are
lesson the last
so
few years.
you are so wise with such a great degree of insight. It is a pleasure to talk with you. That is absolutely a perfect example, and it changes how this, whatever you're trying to do, it changes your success rate if you can somehow drop whatever these things are that stop us from empathizing with other people's positions and connect like that. Then you have more success, like you have,
Yeah,
right?
because that's the thing, right? Because that's what you mentioned earlier on when we're talking about weight loss. If 150 million a year, 150 million people a year tell you this isn't working for me, and you
Right.
just turn around and go, yeah, it's all your fault.
Yeah. I mean, does that even make sense? And that is exactly what we're doing, by the way. And so I've gone on other podcasts and tried to suggest exactly that. Does that even make sense that there's 150 million people? There's literally an epidemic. We just had an epidemic, of course, pandemic with COVID. Can you imagine if we said to people that it's just their fault for getting COVID? Or I mean, there's an epidemic. There's just too many people to say everybody's just lazy or doesn't have willpower or doesn't really want it. It's just way too many people. It doesn't even make sense. But again, to get people to think of it a different way is hard.
Oh, for sure. Like you said, any sort of change is difficult. Like I said, with regards to my friend, is, he said that's just changing people's jobs, let alone changing someone's life. Changing someone's life is a monstrously difficult thing to do. And therefore, I'm completely with you when you said it's about small steps, right? It's about It's about it doesn't have to all happen on Monday.
Right. And there is that critical point. The title of my book is The Catching Point. And it's called that because the catching point in the setting of weight loss is that critical point. But maybe it's saving money or whatever it may be. Maybe it's building a complicated puzzle or a model airplane, whatever project it may be. There is a critical point. There is that point where the entire project becomes easier and more of a pleasure and less of this horrible thing that I don't want to do. But most of this idea and my desire to become an obesity medicine specialist came from watching my mom, because I was living in the house with her And so I had an inside track to what was going on. Here was a woman who was otherwise strong and had willpower and was smart and had all these qualities that supposedly were going to lead to weight loss, or if you didn't have them, that's why you couldn't lose weight. But I knew that wasn't the case. But I would watch her, and I would talk to her, and I would sort of listen to. And one day I asked her, if you had a gun to your head, could you finish this diet? Could you stay on this diet? Could you finish this exercise program? And she told me no. It was that horrible of an experience. But there is that point. So if people would not look all the way to the end, don't look it to the end when you're 130 pounds and you look like a model. Focus on that midpoint, that catching point, because what happens there is that the misery is gone. Right. So focus on getting yourself to the point where the misery is gone, because most of these folks who embark on these things, when they're driving down and they see people walking to yoga or drinking their kale shake, they can't even imagine that. Like how aren't they miserable? Because I've tried going to yoga and I've tried drinking kale. And it's pretty miserable. But there is that critical point in the middle, the point that I call the catching point, after which you don't feel miserable anymore. And then it's easy. It's just like you get the outcome you want by doing something that you want to do. At that point, you're home free. And we've seen people go through this when we block the hunger nerve. We've seen them get to this point where we'll coach them along and they say they don't feel hungry. So they start to make progress, but they still don't really like to exercise. And you'll see them reach this point after which they'll kind of like leave the nest, because they're off on their own then, because they want to go then. Now you see them taking selfies at the gym and, because all of a sudden what they used to hate, now they love. And if you love it, it's easy.
Oh, absolutely. And I found this with one of my clients. One of my clients was very ill a few years ago. And she cut out all sugar from her diet, or at least all added sugar, all highly processed sort of stuff. And that took a while. I mean, that took her a few months to get used to not having any of that sort of stuff. And then, of course, she reintroduced it back in, and it says fruit sugars and all that sort of stuff. But if you take her out to a restaurant now, and there'll be a 5-course meal, and she finishes 5 courses, and of the dessert, she has a couple of bites, but then she's genuinely had enough. As in, she doesn't leave it because it's willpower. And she doesn't go, I should not be having any more of this. The thought just doesn't enter her head in the same way that she leaves it. She's done. She is completely.
This is a super, super important message to folks, because if people think that in order to be lean, I've got to be in this constant state of resistance. Right? This constant state of fighting against what my body wants to do, that is absolutely discouraging. Who wants to live the rest of it? It's not even, because what happens in your head is, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. If this is how I have to feel in order to look like that or be lean or be healthy, this sucks. I don't want to do this. And so that's why the message is so important, that if you get to that catching point, you won't feel miserable anymore. And that's important. I think my mom thought for the rest her whole life, even to this day, I think thought that in order to be like that, you would have to live in this constant state of resistance, which is miserable. And the message of the catching point is that that's not the case at all. In fact, it's not only not hard, it becomes enjoyable. It becomes fun.
Yeah, because you see and you feel the benefits. Right? I'm not saying that people will enjoy actually the physical act of exercise. And let's be honest, lifting heavy things, going to the gym early morning, or going to the gym in the evening, or going out for a run when it's cold and wet always sucks. I mean, I'm a personal trainer. I hate exercise most days. I like having done it. I like the feeling of having done it. And that is not a mental sense of accomplishment, as in, yay, I managed to drag my ass to the gym. I just mean the physical reaction to exercise is enjoyable for me.
Of course. That's what keeps you coming back. I doubt that it's the desire, the desire to be lean. That's a little bit of a driving force, but it's not enough. It's not enough to get you through that. It's this other physical feeling that you're talking about. And everyone knows about the runner's high, and it's the people who are on the other side of the catching point have that physical good feeling, and that's what you're chasing, right? That's what keeps you coming back. That's what addicts you to exercise.
Yes, absolutely. And so a lot of people will be listening to this and go, yeah, that's all well and good, David, but how long is it going to take me? Right?
Yeah, oh, they will ask that, and eventually they look at that, and that answer is it's gonna take a while,
Yeah.
but it's gonna be. I was gonna say, but I can't give you an exact number. You know, that's where everybody hangs up, right?
Yeah.
But the reason for that is because everybody is different, and if we
Yeah.
wanted to discuss another reason why we have this epidemic failure of weight loss attempts, it would be that we ignore individuality, right? We just take this blanket uniform program and try to apply it to every different individual in the universe, which is crazy and ridiculous, right? Because every person is different. And so the answer to your question also is that every person is different. And so how long is it going to take you to get to that catching point? Depends on where you're starting from. If you're starting from a place where walking 400 yards is your exercise capacity, then it's going to take you 6 to 8 months, even a year, to get to the catching point. But I would follow that up quickly with, who cares how long it takes, right? Let's compare it to something else that people always want. I hate to keep it, let's say health, because I don't want to keep going back to money, because who cares about money? Let's say health or wellness or getting rid of COVID or whatever. Or freedom, right? Things like that. If we said it was going to take you 6 to 8 months or 12 months to have this health or to have this freedom, or I guess to have $1 million, what are you going to say? Nah, you get me that $1 million in 6 months, or 3 months, we'll talk. So really, who cares how long it takes? I'm telling your listeners that feeling at that catching point is life changing. So if it takes 6 months, 8 months, a year to get to that catching point, it will change the rest of your life. And moreover, what you're doing now isn't working. So if you take the same 12 months, you're just going to try 3 things in that 12 months and be at the same starting line at the end. Whereas if you go through this program, I guarantee you at that 12 months, you're at a different place. You're at a different place that's going to allow you to succeed in the future. You will get somewhere if you pursue the catching point. If you pursue these miracle weight loss things, you're going to be in the same starting line at that 12-month mark. So 6 to 8 to 12 months it takes to get to that exercise capacity. But once you get there, you're out of the nest, and you'll be a different person, and you'll thank me. I guarantee it.
Well, that's because that's the thing, because that's what I always tell people. If you start making small changes now, a year from now, 2 years from now, however long it is, everybody starts in January, or indeed on Monday, or whenever it is. If you just start, you will feel better at the end of it. And that's a guarantee. That is a stone cold guarantee. If you just make the small changes for your health, and you build a bit of exercise in, or you start eating a bit healthier, whatever you do, I guarantee everybody that they will come to that point, that catching point that you're talking about. That is a guaranteed point. Everybody I know reaches that, unless they do remarkably silly things to get there in a hurry.
Right. And there's another famous Harvard professor named Lee Kaplan, and he said so simply, this is a thing I don't think people realize. Exercise induces the body toward healthy food choices.
Yeah.
And what that means is that right now, eating whatever it might be, I keep saying a kale shake, or maybe some sort of healthy bean salad tomorrow, seems like a miserable idea. That catching point, when your exercise capacity has changed, like your friend with the dessert, you'll choose the healthier option, not out of resistance or struggle or anything like that. You'll do it because you want to. Your body will change in such a way that you'll desire those things that you think are uneatable now. But it requires some trust. It requires some trust to get people to the catching point. So we try to take the people who are there and put them on TV so that everybody will believe us. And I'm on this podcast now to try and spread the word. But it really is a magical place.
Yeah, but like you said, it's a difficult sell for people who have never tried it. It's for people who can't visualize anything like that, as in people saying, nah, I choose to eat spinach rather than French fries or whatever. Not that they're mutually exclusive, but that people just go, no, actually, you know what, gonna have a steak with a salad rather than steak with chips. Some people just, if you always are used to having steak with chips, that must be a very disciplined decision to make. Whereas for people or the steak with salad, no, that's what you have. That's what my body wants with this. I feel better if I have my steak with salad.
Yes. And I don't even want the chips.
No, exactly.
And the point you're making is that people think that what we're saying is not true.
Yeah.
Right? The people on the wrong side of the catching point right now think that we're full of shit. Excuse my language, but it really is true. It really is true.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it goes with everything. When I talk postnatal exercise, I talk a lot of core, those stuff, separation of stomach muscles and all that sort of boring stuff, postnatal back pain, all that sort of thing. I always tell people, if you start doing the exercises, you'll start to enjoy it because you will start to feel the results every single time. That is a guarantee, and it works for everyone because people reach that catching point, as you call it, and they'll continue because they're like, dude, I haven't felt this great in months. Of course, I'm going to keep going.
You wake up and you're thinking about doing that because you want to.
Yeah.
Not because you have to, not because it's part of a program that you've laid out for yourself, but because you just want to do it.
Yeah.
And that's when you crinkle up that program and throw it away because you'll just do it when you want to, as you feel like you want to, because you're an individual. And then as I describe it as being on your way, then you're off on your way, not following this static program.
And like you said, it's a very positive place to come from. Once you reach that point, it's all positivity from there. And there is not the negativity of either restriction or forced exercise or forced movement or whatever you want to call it. It is just this is how I roll because it's what my body wants to do. It's what I want to do. It's better for my mental health. I sleep better. All these things steadily will come together.
And then your life is changed.
Exactly. So people can go find the book on Amazon, right?
Yes, sir. Or at drprologo.com. Has links out to all the other places like Barnes & Noble and Target. But yes, it is on Amazon.
Cool. Because obviously Amazon is still the go-to for...
It is. And Audible. I know a lot of people want to listen nowadays. So it's Audible. And that's another place people can, if they're driving and so on here.
Yeah, no, cool. Then I highly recommend that. To be honest, I always like listening to something in the car, and it can't always be Bill Burr's angry, shouty podcast. Right? It has to be something uplifting and motivational every
and
now
informative. I hope informative.
Yes,
and validating. So for all the people who might be listening or know somebody who are listening now, know somebody who say, I must have slow metabolism, or I must have bad genetics, or maybe my thyroid is slow, or the people who can kind of feel their body fighting them, but they don't know how to articulate it. This book is going to validate everything that you felt. This book is going to explain why you feel that way. And so then you can be like, I knew it. And then of course we guide you around it, but I think it is important to validate people so that they know that what they were saying was true, and anybody who didn't listen owes them an apology.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's all about that's interesting because a lot of people out there will indeed be saying, I've tried this a million times before, it never worked for me, and it's not their fault. Right? It's genuinely not the fault. I always say the health and fitness industry and diet industry, if you want to lash out at them, have a lot to answer for in the way that we've formulated this sort of stuff. Because every single scientific paper, like you said, and you have a lot more experience than I do in this particular field, every scientific paper says exactly the same thing with regards to this stuff.
For sure. And if somehow we could just switch places, if we could take the person who's always been lean and sort of looks down their nose at people who can't make that change, if just somehow we could switch places for a couple days and say, okay, let's have you try and lose weight now in this new situation with these new signals from your body that you didn't know exist. it would be a quick apology. Whoa, I didn't know it was like this. Sorry. All right.
Well, and that's interesting because when you talk to bodybuilders are a prime example of this. When you just mentioned it, show me a bodybuilder that is happy 2 days before a competition, and
Yeah.
I'll show you a bodybuilder who won't succeed in the competition. Those guys lose their mind when
They
it's cutting
do.
time.
They do.
Because
They
it's
they
brutal.
induce
And,
that.
yeah, and
That
it's difficult, and it's so horrifically difficult for those guys. They're happy when they're bulking, right?
right. Right.
But losing weight is difficult even for people who enjoy exercise.
Absolutely. That's
It's,
such a good example. They're happy when they're bulking because the body wants to bulk. The
yeah,
body wants to store this food and survive in the winter, and that's the natural response. And I'm glad you brought up bodybuilders because they really illustrate two great things. One, you already said that even for an athlete who's in shape, when you induce this starvation event, the body is miserable, right?
yeah.
So it illustrates that. But it also, bodybuilders illustrate something else that I think is super, super important, and it's this. What I've written in this book and what Dr. Atkins wrote in his book, and even Agustin in the South Beach Diet, right? These are principles of medicine that bodybuilders already knew, right? So when Atkins came along, he was talking about what we talked about earlier, macronutrient thermogenesis, the idea of burning calories while you digest protein and having low carbs. Arnold Schwarzenegger knew that way before Atkins said anything about it, right? It was just a medical thing that he wrote into a book, but that bodybuilders already knew. And this is the same thing. This is just me taking the evidence from obesity medicine and writing it in a book, things that people who are already there and have the ability to go down to 1% body fat and have to resist all of these challenges, as you mentioned, they already know. So these principles are out there for people who are succeeding. But like the South Beach Diet and like Atkins, I've just taken that and put it in a book for you.
I made it a hell of a lot easier to achieve than Atkins or South Beach. And I'm not knocking Atkins or South Beach. I'm a diet agnostic in the world. I don't care much about which diet people like to stick to, but it has to be achievable. And I think your
approach, you really have a good way of saying these things. You really articulate these perfectly. I wish I would have met you before I wrote that.
Oh, thank you very much. On that happy note, was there anything else you'd like to touch on, David?
No, thank you for your time. Thank you for talking to me this long.
Awesome. Thank you very much indeed. I'll just press stop record. And indeed, I press stop record right there. Thanks very much to Dr. David Prologo for coming on. I mean, this guy's got all the qualifications, right? He is obviously the catching point transformation. The book is available on the internet. I will link to this. I thought it was an insightful conversation. I always like it when people agree with me, of course. And, there is no secret to any of this stuff. But I think there are some interesting insights that he has with regards to the whole, it's going to suck for a little while, but then you fall into it. Then you fall into the new routine. And we always used to say, it takes 3 weeks to create a habit. It might be 3 months, it might be 6 months. But the key, as he pointed out, as he started off by saying, is don't try to do everything at once. Just, get there. Just make a plan, stick to it. It doesn't have to be extreme to get the result you want. I had a blast. Talking to him. Obviously, all his social information and website information will be in the podcast description. And, I strongly recommend checking out the book. I really, really strongly recommend that. Let's see if there's an in the news this week. There must be some news this week, right? So, in the news this week was a thing that I read in a Dutch newspaper called the Algemeen Dagblad, the AD. Also linked to an article in the Times, which basically shows the same study about how 90% of all makeups and makeup-related products still contain microplastics. Almost all shampoos and creams and all that sort of stuff. this action group, I think it's Plastic Soup Foundation. It's called. Had a look at 7,700 cosmetic products and wellness products and all that sort of stuff. And they found 87% still contain microplastics. Now, microplastics, of course, we kind of know that they're a problem, but for some reason we don't seem at all sure what they are. Another study was saying that many people think that microplastics are banned in or prohibited even in cosmetics, which is not true. Those micro beads that you used to find in like face scrubs and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, they're banned now, but or they're prohibited in most, as far as I know. They stopped using them quite a lot. But the microplastics itself, to make products gooey and all that sort of stuff, it is not at all banned, and apparently there's not at all on the cards to get that banned. And the interesting thing is, even knowing, even if you ask L'Oreal whether there's any plastic in the product, the answer is often it's no, because technically the manufacturer may well be telling the truth. Technically, it's not plastic. It's full of synthetic polymers, but it's not actual plastic. And that is kind of what the thing is. Microplastics are not necessarily plastics. Apparently, plastic is a mixture of the synthetic polymers and other chemicals and all that sort of stuff. When hardeners and other chemicals are added to synthetic polymers, it becomes plastic. But the biggest and most important ingredient in plastics are the synthetic polymers. And, that is kind of, it's all kind of semantics. That's what I'm saying. So when you look at the back of your products and you find, actually it says it doesn't contain any of that sort of stuff. Turns out it still does, 90%. I mean, it's a shockingly high number. I will also link to an old article from Helle Natur, which basically, there are some ways that you can avoid using microplastics and all that sort of stuff in cosmetic products. There's some completely plastic-free cosmetics and all that sort of stuff are listed in that article as well. Because I know a lot of you guys care about all this sort of stuff. This also ties in nicely with the podcast I'm doing next week. Because I recorded an interview this week. If you follow me on social media, I follow HPMB on social media, then you'll have come across this. Teresa Forms Norton, or something like that, is her name, from the Green Gurus. We did an interview about household chemicals and cleaning products and all that sort of stuff. Well, this ties in nicely. All these chemicals that you shouldn't be putting on your face, all those chemicals that you shouldn't have as products in the house because they're not really good for your health and all that sort of thing. Fascinating interview, and it was a difficult one for me, to be honest. It was a really difficult one, but fascinating. Anyways, that's me done for another week. We're at 1 hour and 5 minutes. New bit of music coming up. You have a tremendous week. Take care of yourself, and I'll check in on you next week. Right? Bye now.